This episode of the Officer Down Memorial Podcast is sponsored in part by Law Enforcement Labor Services in Minnesota.
Law Enforcement Labor Services, also known as LELS, is Minnesota's largest public safety labor union, with over 7,000 Minnesota public safety members serving in all areas of public safety: law enforcement, 911 dispatch centers, corrections, public safety administrative support personnel, and firefighters. Established in 1977, LELS serves over 260 different public safety agencies and over 450 locals across the state of Minnesota. With their administration, general counsel, 3 staff attorneys, and 14 business agents, LELS provides contract negotiations for better wages and benefits, grievance processing and representation, discipline representation, mediation and arbitration, assistance with representation for post-board hearings, and in-line of duty death benefits for survivor families. Find out more about law enforcement labor services at LELS.org. LELS.org.
Episodes of the Officer Down Memorial Podcast may contain strong language and violent content. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Sheriff Scott Rose from Minnesota, and I'm your host for today's new episode of the Officer Down Memorial Podcast.
Walking eastbound.
In each episode of the Officer Down Memorial Podcast, we'll share the details and the stories of how these men and women heroically lost their lives in the line of duty. Our mission is to help ensure their service and sacrifice is never forgotten. Thanks for spending some time with me today to remember and honor these fallen heroes. This year, the Supreme Court ruled that separating children in public schools by race was unconstitutional, overturning the separate but equal principle established in 1896. This landmark decision was a major victory for the NAACP in its fight for civil rights.
Brown was a movement akin to the civil rights movement. It was a collective action brought about by more than 200 people who stood with the NAACP as plaintiffs in the 5 cases that comprise Brown v. Board of Education.
The majority of Americans do not know about the other cases. They are limited to thinking about Brown and Brown only.
This story is part of history.
Baseball legend Joe DiMaggio, known for his 56-game hitting streak and the 9 World Series titles during his 13 years with the New York Yankees, marries American actress Marilyn Monroe.
The romance that thrills the world. The marriage of Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio attracts a record crowd to the San Francisco court where the ceremony is performed. 2 top-flight performers living up to long-established reputations as outstanding drawing cards. Congratulations in which all movie lovers and baseball fans join. And now the pair are off for their happy honeymoon. The girl who starred in How to Marry a Millionaire giving another starring performance in How to Marry a Baseball Hero. Nice work, Marilyn, and the same to you, Joe.
Like many great love stories, the stars' relationships had many complexities, loving yet tumultuous. Their differences in personalities led to disharmony in the relationship, and Joe and Marilyn divorced less than a year after their wedding day.
This is the National Broadcasting Company.
The National Broadcasting Company, or NBC, would kick off their first late-night show ever called Tonight. The TV talk show ran from 11:30 p.m. to midnight live from the Hudson Theater in New York with their first ever host, Steve Allen.
From New York City, the National Broadcasting Company presents Tonight, starring Steve Allen. With Edie Gourmet, Steve Lawrence, Pat Marshall, Andy Williams. The music of Skitch Henderson. Tonight's special guests, Wally Cox, Bill Kenny of Ink Spots fame, and New York's greatest giant, Willie Mays. Just off the crossroads of the world, Times Square is NBC's Hudson Theater. That's where we're taking you now, tonight and every night. Now to meet the star of our show, Steve Allen.
The Tonight Show is the world's longest-running talk show and the longest-running regularly scheduled entertainment program in the United States. The year was 1954. North Dakota is our 39th state in the Union. It's part of the Great Plains region, characterized by broad plains, temperate savanna, badlands, and farmland, after the indigenous Dakota Sioux. North Dakota is the 19th largest state, but with a population of less than 780,000, it is the 4th least populous and the 4th most sparsely populated. With limited numbers of communities and sparsely populated and spread out counties, the state's highway patrol has always been a very important part of safety in this Midwestern state. The North Dakota State Highway Patrol was nearing its 20th anniversary, and they were fully staffed at 42 uniformed officers. Initially known as the Highway Police in North Dakota, the agency started in 1935 with 5 patrol officers who were appointed to enforce North Dakota laws relating to the protection and use of public highways. These highway patrol officers were vested with all the powers held by peace officers within the state, with a statewide jurisdiction. By 1954, the governor had been given the power of appointing a superintendent and assistant superintendent to lead the patrol. Each patrolman was mandated to be bonded by the state and each carry a badge of authority with the state seal in the center with the words North Dakota Highway Patrol emblazed around the border. One of the veteran patrolmen serving North Dakota that year on the Highway Patrol was 58-year-old Beryl Mclane. After growing up in Illinois and then South Dakota, Beryl served in the United States Army during World War I as a cook in the 49th Balloon Company of the aviation section. He was honorably discharged and returned to South Dakota, where he met Bernice Hathaway. The two were married in 1918 and lived in Mitchell and Aberdeen before Beryl started his law enforcement career with the Aberdeen Police Department back in 1927. He later accepted a chief's position with the Ellendale, North Dakota Police Department in 1936, and then accepted a position with the North Dakota Highway Patrol during their expansion in 1941. He and Bernice moved to Jamestown to start his career with the state. Beryl and Bernice had 2 kids, Robert and Beverly. Beryl was badge number 18. He drove unit number 218. Beryl would serve the Highway Patrol there for 7 years until he transferred to the post in Napoleon, North Dakota. Around 1,000 people called this small community home back in 1954. Napoleon is a small rural community 70 miles southeast of Bismarck, and it's the county seat of Logan County. Farming is the primary industry there, and Beryl was very well liked in this small, tight-knit community. He was often seen visiting at the post office, at the coffee shop, and elsewhere around town. He was a familiar figure there in Napoleon. It was the afternoon of July 30th, 1954. It was summer in North Dakota, and as in most Midwestern states, summer is often referred to as road construction season. It was a typical hot summer day in southern North Dakota. Archie Campbell and company were working on a road construction project on US 281, which runs north from Edgeley to the county line. An early morning rain was enough to prevent the Campbell crew from working that day, which gave their construction workers the day off. 3 of these construction workers had decided they were going to go out and party. They're going to go out and drink and fish. They piled into their vehicle and drove to the James River Dam at Lemoore to do some fishing. Lemoore is about 90 miles east of Napoleon. Highway Patrolman Robert Kylingstead was in Lemoore planning to work a traffic check or a roadblock. Now, back in those days, the patrol would stop vehicles and check the operator's license, along with a safety check of the vehicle equipment. These checks were routine and often done by a patrol to promote traffic safety. Beryl was also on patrol that day, and he was eastbound driving from Napoleon to Lemoore to help with the roadblock. While waiting for Beryl, Patrolman Kylingstead stopped at the Lemoore County Sheriff's Office to see the sheriff there. While they were there talking, the sheriff took a report of 3 men causing a disturbance on the James River. The reporter said that they were drinking alcohol and annoying other people fishing. They called the sheriff's office to complain. Patrolman Kylingstead and the sheriff responded to the James River. When they arrived, they were told the three suspects had left and were westbound on North Dakota Highway 13. Collingstead and the sheriff immediately left and they headed west to try and catch up with the suspect vehicle. The three men who had been drinking alcohol and causing problems at the dam, they all piled up into the front seat of their car and sped off westbound down Highway 13. The driver was later identified as 26-year-old Ernest Anderson. His drinking buddies were Daryl Trudeau and Jackson Dodd. At some point during their travels, the driver, Ernest Anderson, indicated that he and Trudeau, who was sitting by the passenger door with Dodd between them, they got into an argument. Now, the argument escalated to Trudeau kicking at the steering wheel and at Anderson's hands while he was driving. Witnesses indicated that they believed Anderson was driving about 90 miles per hour when he passed a car. Now, while passing, Trudeau kicked at the wheel again and got his foot caught in the steering wheel. Anderson came back into the north lane and onto the gravel on the shoulder. Then he swerved back onto the south side of the roadway. Then back to the north side of the road. Witnesses said he continued driving straight for a while, apparently while fighting and arguing with Trudeau, before he again veered onto the south side of the roadway. Anderson was again in the eastbound lane, or south side of the roadway, heading westbound. Once again on the wrong side of the road, traveling at about 90 miles per hour, when he realized a vehicle was headed straight towards him, and he hit the brakes. It was likely just a few minutes later when, while trying to catch up to their suspect vehicle, Patrolman Collingstead and the sheriff arrived at a crash scene. Now, keep in mind, at this point, they didn't know who was involved in this crash. They knew they just came upon it while they were looking for their suspect vehicle. The first car they came upon was straddling the center lane in the middle of the roadway, and the other car was on the south side of the roadway facing east. They got to the first car, and one of the men was lying on the roadway. Another one was seated in the vehicle with his feet outside the car. They would find out later that there was a third occupant. He had already left the scene. These three passengers were injured, but they were alive. They then ran to check the second car and realized it was a highway patrol car. It was patrol car 218. They found Patrolman Beryl Mclane still seated in the car. It appeared he'd been killed instantly by the impact. Beryl likely never even had a chance to get out of the way before the crash. The crash investigation revealed the point of impact was 7 feet south of the center line of the roadway. The suspect vehicle that Anderson was driving was entirely in the eastbound lane at the time of the crash. The three men were taken to the hospital in Oaks. They were under guard by a county deputy. Anderson would be arrested for DUI. His blood alcohol content was 0.19%. Anderson would also be charged with manslaughter in the first degree. Now, Jackson Dodd and Daryl Trudeau, the two passengers, were just charged with being drunk in a public place. The funeral for North Dakota Highway Patrolman Beryl Mclane was held at the Eddy Funeral Chapel in Jamestown on Tuesday, August 3rd, 1954. With Reverend McCoy and Reverend Burgum co-officiating. The funeral was attended by a majority of the state's Highway Patrol members who served as an honor guard for their fellow fallen officer. Photos from the funeral can be seen on Beryl's webpage. The link is in the notes. Anderson's jury trial was set for Monday, March 14th, 1955 in Lemoore County District Court, but 4 days prior, on March 10th, a hearing was held before the judge, and the state's attorney advised that the defendant, Anderson, had offered to withdraw his plea of not guilty and enter a plea of guilty to manslaughter in the second degree. The state said they had no objection to the reduction from first degree to second degree, and Judge Porter accepted the guilty plea. Dodd and Trudeau, the other two passengers, they were charged with drinking in a public place, and the fine back then for this charge was $27 and a 15-day suspended jail sentence. The state's attorney, after hearing positive character references from the community that Anderson lived in, felt sympathy for Anderson's family, his wife, and his 6 kids. Lemoore County Judge Porter would sentence Anderson to the penitentiary at Bismarck for a period of not less than 1 year, but no more than 3 years. North Dakota Highway Patrolman Beryl Mclane was survived by his wife Bernice, son Robert, daughter Beverly and her husband Ole Adelson, and his grandson Ken Adelson. Beryl Mclane, born in 1896, just before the turn of the century, he would grow up and spend most of his adult life serving his country, his community, and his state. After serving in World War I, he would spend 22 years serving in city and state law enforcement in North Dakota. Beryl was 58 years old when he died. He was just a few years from retirement. He was enjoying being a grandpa. Kenneth was his first grandchild. Beryl was a big man. He was 5'11", 230 pounds, and was always able to hold his own, but he didn't have a chance with the vehicle hitting him head-on at 90 miles per hour. Beryl's lifelong commitment to service was a commitment made not only by Beryl, but also by Bernice and their 2 kids. They surely sacrificed in every community they lived in. Sacrifices like the long hours, the shift work, overnight shifts, call-outs, all the time that Beryl would have to be gone serving his community. Sacrifices made by this entire family, a family like most law enforcement families that believe in service before self, a family that believed in right and wrong. They believed in community. Bernice Pearl Mclane never married again and lived to the age of 98 years old. She died in 1993. As of 2024, when this podcast was produced, Beryl was the only line-of-duty death for the state's highway patrol in history, the only state patrol in the country with just 1 line-of-duty death. Over the years, several with the state have worked to ensure Beryl Mclane's service and sacrifice is never forgotten. In 2016, former Superintendent Mike Gerhardt said that he was approached by Lieutenant Dan Haugen and had an idea to dedicate classrooms at the training academy to the memory of officers who died in the line of duty. The second-floor conference room was renamed the Trooper Beryl Mclane Conference Room. A placard honoring Beryl is displayed outside that door to this day. In 2020, Lieutenant Daniel Haugen and Sergeant Tim Coughlin visited Highland Home Cemetery to locate McLane's grave. Lieutenant Haugen said the grave was marked by a small marker and a military-type headstone. You can see these pictures on his page. Haugen spoke to Trooper Stephen Mayer, the president of the North Dakota Troopers Association, and the association's board of directors agreed to pursue the idea of replacing the grave marker, which was funded by an anonymous donor. On August 1st, 2022, a new tombstone was dedicated for McLane and his wife at a ceremony at the cemetery. The new tombstone features the North Dakota State Patrol emblem and McLane's badge number and individual stones crafted to resemble his military footstone. Bernice, again who passed in 1993, was never able to see this honor, but McLane's grandson, Ken, who was 3 at the time he died, was in attendance at the ceremony to honor his grandfather. In 2023, the North Dakota Department of Transportation designated a stretch of North Dakota Highway 13 from Edgeley to Lemoore as the Trooper Beryl Mclane Memorial Highway. Governor Doug Burgum signed the bill into law on May 18, 2023. In July of 2024, McLean County Sheriff's Lieutenant Kurt Olson, a 40-year veteran of North Dakota law enforcement, researched and wrote the complete story of Beryl Mclane for the 70th anniversary of his passing.
I started writing some of these things on just, I did one last year on a 60-year anniversary of an officer death and a 30-year anniversary. And I feel it's important that we always remember those that made the ultimate sacrifice and laid down their life for the state of North Dakota.
Lieutenant Olson currently serves as the chair of the Historical Preservation Committee for the North Dakota Peace Officers Association, and he's always been absolutely committed to making sure that none of North Dakota's fallen officers are ever forgotten. One of the messages of this story, one of the lessons we know Beryl would want to be shared is please don't drink and drive. Every day, about 37 people in the United States die in drunk driving crashes. That's one person every 39 minutes. In 2022, 13,524 people died in alcohol-impaired driving deaths. According to the National Police Association, around 25,000 people are injured by impaired drivers annually as well. The extent of drivers impaired by drugs other than or in addition to alcohol, including prescription drugs that also affect motor control and perception, is not fully known but is estimated at over 12 million annually. Among those victims are law enforcement officers who spend hours on our streets and highways in all kinds of hazardous conditions. Crashes of all kinds killed 61 officers in 2021. Drunk drivers are a huge threat to public safety, to the safety of you and me, the safety of our kids, the safety of our grandkids. The anti-police movement has pushed to eliminate many of the most basic traffic stops cops use because of the allegation that they are race-biased. The reality is, in 99.99% of those cases, this couldn't be further from the truth. These basic traffic stops, day after day, help law enforcement all over the country get impaired drivers off our roadways. Please support your local law enforcement and the hard work they do day and night to keep us safe. Safe in our homes, safe in our communities, and safe on our roadways. As we listen to and share this story, Beryl Mclane's story, and the underlying message about the dangers of drunk driving, Beryl will continue to make a difference, and together we'll continue to share his story and ensure his service and his sacrifice is never forgotten.
Walking eastbound, walking eastbound.
Thank you for spending the time to listen, learn about, and honor the memory of this fallen hero. Make sure you take the time to thank your local law enforcement for their service and their sacrifice. And don't forget to thank their families too. They also sacrifice so much for our safety. It's up to us to help ensure the sacrifices made by these fallen heroes and by their families are never forgotten. So please share this podcast with family and friends. Until next time, this is the Officer Down Memorial Podcast. I'm Scott Rose. Thanks for listening.